Just as a reminder, you're in the big picture track, and our next talk is titled Defenseless in Depth. It's presented by Ryan Smith, who's the Chief Chief Research Scientist at Accuvent Labs.
That's correct, Chief Research Scientist.
Yes, please welcome Ryan.
Thanks for coming, everyone. It's a big room, so I think they had higher expectations than I can fulfill, but hopefully we'll have a good time. So my presentation is entitled Defenseless in Depth, and as I was introduced before, I'm the Chief Research Scientist for Accuvent Labs, and my Twitter is @HustleLabs. I need more followers. So with this presentation, what I'm hoping that everybody here can take home is a little bit of insight into the research process, or at least how we do it at Accuvent Labs. Sort of the view from an attacker's perspective, because a lot of the people in the audience, I'm assuming, spend their days trying to secure a network. Can you raise your hands if your job is to secure a network? Come on. There we go, yeah. So when we're securing a network, sometimes we fail to take into account how an attacker might view the things we're using to secure that network. Hopefully I'll have a few questions for you that you can ask your security vendor to make them a little bit nervous. So that might be fun. Maybe you could get a free lunch out of it or something. So I wanted to do a little bit of a warm-up. It is after lunch and all that. So when I came to Las Vegas, I bought and packed this hand espresso machine because I thought I would need coffee on demand in my room at any time, right? So I was a little bit nervous about presenting yesterday, and a gentleman told me, don't drink any coffee the day you present. And it was a good thing he didn't say espresso, because otherwise I wouldn't be here today. So we have kind of an overarching thesis in this presentation. Originally I was going to give it with a colleague of mine, Alex Wheeler, but he couldn't make it, so I'm going to use the term we a lot, and that just means him and myself. So given that defense in depth strategies can be implemented with security products, do we all accept that? Is that true? Yeah? Nod heads? Wave hands? Yeah, there we go. So, and that security products have lots of lines of code. Is that good? Are we good with that? Okay, cool. So each line of code that processes attacker data is another opportunity for an attacker. Basically anything where it could potentially go wrong and parse something incorrectly or anything else is an extra opportunity for an attacker to break into that system. So the overarching thesis is the defense in depth strategy actually presents lots of opportunities for attackers. We're trying to sort of cornerhole them into not being able to exploit our networks, but at the same time, by adding those additional lines of code, we're giving them more opportunities. Oh, and there was a little cool zooming thing that I forgot to do. So, as a little bit of insight into the research process that we had, sometimes research results are unexpected. Sometimes you go in there saying, this is what I'm going to research and this is the end goal. That was not the case with this. Basically, we got together and we said, hey, auditing security products might be fun. Let's take a look at those and see if we can find some vulnerabilities in those. And then we started to see some patterns coming across. These security products have vulnerabilities in it, something that we didn't necessarily expect going off. I mean, we were pretty confident, but it was nice to see that there were some vulnerabilities, so we were somewhat successful. So then we drew some conclusions from those patterns and took those conclusions and we made a Blackhat speech. So one thing that I will remember next time, the most important thing about the Blackhat speech is that you finish in time. Didn't work out so well, but we got everything going and everything worked out. So basically defense in depth is this thing that came from the military originally. It's something that came from another realm that we're applying to computer science principles. So the military take and the military idea of defense in depth is to have a small number of heavily fortified soldiers in fortresses, basically, surrounding a country in order to protect the country, and have a large number of mobile troops that can come and back them up if anybody were to attack the country. Does anybody know how that directly applies to computer science? I mean, basically the only example I could think of is honeypots are kind of like that, where honeypots are this sort of territory that people can break into somewhat easier, and then the rest of the defenses can come. But that's not actually what we use honeypots for. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that this defense in depth term actually caught on. Basically, defense in depth is kind of a term that people use to say, we're putting security everywhere we can possibly think of putting security. Does everyone agree with that? Yeah, so basically it's an excuse to get another antivirus. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad strategy, but you have to remember this entire presentation is coming from an attacker's perspective. The result of applying these defenses at every point possible is that attackers can interact with more and more lines of code. If you guys remember when Service Pack 2 came out with XP, one of the main security things they did there was to reduce the amount of code and reduce the attack surface. But by putting these products out there that are processing attacker code, antivirus, IDS, all of those things are purpose-built to process attacker code. So we're actually creating a better opportunity for an attacker. And here's an example of the different things that I've heard with defense in depth. Basically deploying, and so also, I failed to mention this, but this presentation is going to focus mainly on antivirus. And the reason we did that was to keep it sort of short and concise. But so with antivirus and defense in depth, basically email gateways, traffic gateways, workstations, servers, all have antivirus deployed on them in a potential defense in depth setup. And also different antivirus engines. Maybe we'll use McAfee at one layer, maybe we'll use Bitdefender at another. And so the attacker's translation, when the attacker hears this, is that you're going to deploy potentially vulnerable code where email is stored and processed, where traffic has to flow through, potentially every machine on your network. And basically, not only are we going to deploy it in quantity, but we're also going to deploy a variety of it. So the only thing that's not antivirus that I have in this presentation is the Trusted Platform module. Who here has a Trusted Platform module that they know about on their systems? Who here has an IBM ThinkPad? A few more. So basically every IBM ThinkPad comes with a Trusted Platform module, and it's enabled by default. I like to call it the Trusting Platform module, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's my favorite term. Some people thought of treacherous and stuff like that, but I'm just not that creative, and it was a few too many syllables for me. So the motivations behind TPM, boot time encryption. Do we use boot time encryption? Some of us? So basically you can secure that boot time encryption by having it so that the boot is actually secure basically up until where you enter your password, so that no program can look at the password as you're typing it in, such as keyloggers and malware. So that's basically what it's used for now. Eventually, the idea is that it will also enable companies to do DRM things, to make sure that we can't copy music, basically to make sure that you can't inspect programs. The other thing is it will complicate a lot of security work in the future. If DRM is implemented, that also means that we won't be able to attach debuggers to processes anymore, and all of the other things that the companies don't think we should do. This is a little bit sort of conspiracy theory, but it's interesting. So the way it started, it's sort of like a slow play in poker. Basically, it was a scary specification at first, but that didn't attract much attention. So then, when that scariness died down, they started building it into every ThinkPad laptop as soon as it wasn't on the tip of everyone's tongue when they were talking about the next violation of user rights. So after they did that, they allowed the operation that everybody wants, boot time encryption, making sure that malware can't look at that password. That's awesome. That's something everybody wants. In the future, I believe that they're going to implement DRM and all the other stuff preventing fair use, and eventually unleash the robot plague. That last part was a joke. I know it's after lunch, but you got to wake up. So a little bit about the TPM boot process. So as soon as the computer goes on, it enters the reset state. And that's a very defined state. You can look through the Intel documentation, and basically it starts executing at 0000FFFF as soon as the computer boots up. And that loads the BIOS boot block, is what it's called. And that basically just initializes the system to a sane state so that the rest of the BIOS code can run without having to do too many crazy things. The boot block also checks the signatures on secondary stages. Basically, it's kind of like having several executables inside one BIOS chip is how it's built today. So, also the boot block will perform an update of the boot block itself if there's an update present. Because if you look at the next step, the ability to write to the chip gets disabled as soon as the boot block leaves and goes into the main code. So you can't write that area of the BIOS. And after that, the secondary BIOS code is executed. So basically, it's a pretty secure certificate chain going forward. As long as the boot block is secure, the idea is that everything else is secure. So the boot block can't be updated. RSA signatures are hard to forge. They tend to use RSA signatures to be able to authenticate the rest of the boot block. And basically, everything has a whole lot of complex modular arithmetic applied to it. So I guess the thing that actually makes this secure is that forging an RSA signature is somewhat difficult. The reason that, and the way it works is a hash value is generated of the specific piece of code to be authenticated. They pad the hash value, and then they compute its hash value to the third power mod private key, and that's the public signature basically for the code. So they take that signature value afterwards, and they'll compute the hash value to the third mod the public key in order to get the data back that was signed. And basically it's hard to do that without being able to know a couple of things. The reason is prime factorization of those private and public keys is hard, we all know that. And without those signature values, if a secure padding scheme is used inside that RSA signature, it's going to be incredibly hard to forge. So these are some things that make RSA signatures easy to forge. Or one thing in particular, actually, it's insecure padding. How many people know about RSA signature padding? How many people have looked into that a bit? Audience participation, please. There we go. Just lie to me if you have to. Thank you, John. So basically, along with all the RSA standards, they have a lot of standards about how to securely implement padding inside of an RSA signature. And the reason that they do that is because one value that's super easy to compute is the desired value, the cube root of that, and use that as a signature. Because if you remember back to the RSA, it basically takes whatever was signed and puts it to the third power, and that's the actual signature that comes out. And as long as that doesn't wrap around the modulus, which happens when insecure RSA padding, when secure RSA padding is used, it's ensured that it wraps around the modulus. But when it's not, that means it doesn't need to wrap around the modulus, and it's super easy to compute cube roots. So basically, let's talk a little bit about IBM's implementation of RSA inside the TPM. The subtitle is the wrong way, because you should never do this if you're implementing it. So basically, inside the BIOS, they have 10 24-bit RSA signatures, and inside that, they stuff 160-bit SHA-1 hash. Does anybody here read assembly code? Okay, so I'll talk people through this a bit. Thanks, guys. So basically what this does is it takes the signature value after the RSA operations have taken place and takes the last 20 bytes, which is the size of a SHA-1 hash, and uses that to compare to the actual thing. So basically, the padding idea is that we're going to not look at the first 6 C bytes of the RSA signature and only look at the last 20. So here's a signature taken from an IBM laptop. It's a huge number. This is sort of the values that I was talking about, and this is the associated public key. So when you do that RSA operation, this comes out. If you see the zeros there, that means it's left padded with zeros, so those values wouldn't matter, and we traditionally wouldn't write them when we were writing them out on paper. But so there's some interesting consequences of the way IBM did this. Basically what you can do is you can write Trojan BIOS code and have a permeable area, an area that can change without harming the code that you've written. And you take that area and you change it until the SHA-1 hash matches up with the last 20 bytes of a perfect cube. It doesn't matter if the perfect cube is 20 bytes long. What matters is the last bytes must be a perfect cube. And basically you insert the cube root as a signature, and you've just defeated IBM's RSA implementation. I wanted to zoom in on that, but I can't remember why right now. So basically, that's the flaw inside the IBM TPM. I don't have a proof of concept today. Basically, all the people who raised their hands when they said they have Lenovo laptops, they're currently affected by this vulnerability. And we didn't do any proof of concepts today because we figured that explaining it, we figured that doing a proof of concept and showing it work would be a bad idea until IBM gets around to fixing that, which is going to be incredibly difficult. So the possible impact of this, who here uses the TPM? Yeah, so what do you use it for? Shout. Exactly, boot encryption. So basically, all of the boot encryption, when you thought previously that that boot password couldn't be sniffed by malware, I can take and write a piece of code and have IBM's TPM authenticate that as something legitimate and sniff that password and do whatever I want with it. Additionally, BitLocker. Do people here use BitLocker? A little bit? Yeah, so BitLocker uses the TPM, and basically you can use this to sniff people's passwords. So I'm going to pick on antivirus a bit more. So antivirus vulnerabilities are not new, but they are very rare, or at least there's not a lot of them that are found and reported. The peak here was in 2007 with 30 of them found, but this is also NIST.gov. Basically, it was just a simple search for antivirus and all the CVEs that matched it. So there might be some noise in this data, but in general, it gives you a good picture of how small the number of antivirus vulnerabilities that come out are. So here's several different CVEs. Basically, all of these vulnerabilities were found by Alex Wheeler, myself, or Neil Mehta. There were lots of other vulnerabilities, but if you look at these, you can see that there's quite the smattering of different file formats that were affected. Basically, we have LHA. Does anybody use ARJ or even remember it? We've got some hardcore people, right? Yeah, there we go. So basically, all of those different file formats were vulnerable. And it's kind of difficult because the antivirus, in order to parse that file format, has to do the same thing that the actual software that's designed to manipulate those file formats does. And if those pieces of software have vulnerabilities, antivirus is as well. Also, there were several previous Blackhat speeches that talked a little bit about going into antivirus. Alex Wheeler and Neil Mehta in 2005. I'm going to horribly mispronounce that last name, but Feng presented in 2008, along with Sinan Aaron. And those were presentations basically about having vulnerabilities in antivirus and how important it is to secure antivirus. So with all of this, with all of these different things that antivirus does bad, and with all of these different vulnerabilities that are introduced by antivirus, why do people still install antivirus? Because antiviruses detect malicious programs. Who believes this? I want a shout out. Yeah? No? Every once in a while. There we go. Perfect. We're waking up now. So anybody who does believe this should try to figure out why SVC host is malicious and why McAfee decided to brick all those systems. So who believes antiviruses make computers safer? Just that blanket statement. A little bit safer, right? It gets rid of the known vulnerabilities, and it gets rid of the known pieces of malware out there, and it definitely helps. It's better than having nothing, especially on end-user systems. But also you have to remember all those vulnerabilities that came out. Although antivirus does make you safer against some things, it's sort of a trade-off. There are vulnerabilities that you're introducing when you install antivirus. So the other thing that people may believe is that there are no more vulnerabilities in antivirus. Do we believe that? No? Sweet. Well, if you did, I'm going to try to change your mind. Here we have a little snippet. Who here uses Trend Micro? We have a few users. Oh, sorry, I messed that all up. So there was this vulnerability here. It was discovered by Alex Wheeler, and the vulnerability is inside the kernel driver. It's difficult to exploit, but the reason I say there's a high reward is because this piece of code is also probably used on their endpoints, at all those different areas, their email gateways. So it's something that can get you into lots of good data. So here's the piece of code specifically. Does anybody see the issue with this one? No issues? What about if we do this? So that piece of code right there is basically saying we're going to add a length inside of the allocator to the size of a structure, which is rather large, and we're going to add 4 to the end of that. And the issue with this is there's an integer overflow. They don't check to make sure that when you add all these values together, that it's not larger than any of the smaller pieces inside of it. So what you can do with this is, inside the default allocator, which affects lots of different file formats, you can say, I want a huge length, and it's going to return a very small length, and we all know what happens when that occurs. Basically, it'll allow you, every computer that's running Trend Micro, it'll allow you to take it over, basically the same as browser exploits or Macromedia, Flash. They are doing a check right there, right? If length is greater than cache length or not global unknown VMM, but that's not set. So they do a check, which is actually kind of interesting. It's ironic that they do have a check, but that check is disabled. Oh, right. That's it. That's why this check is disabled. Only for large things. Thank you. So another example we have is Bitdefender. Does anybody use Bitdefender for anything? No. Good. You're all safe. What's up? Yeah, Bitdefender is actually OEM'd by a lot of IDSs. I don't know of any products off the top of my head, but I did have a very large laundry list, and I probably should have included it. Basically, if you're using something that OEMs an antivirus, Bitdefender could potentially be the antivirus that you do use. So this is something that was discovered by myself and Alex Wheeler. And who here has been affected or knows someone who's been affected or has heard of someone being affected by a PDF parsing issue? Yeah, there we go. There's lots of issues with parsing PDF. It's an awesome file format. So basically, there's this area of code right here where you can supply 2 different 4-byte values, and then it adds them together right there into ESI. And again, this is the same sort of thing. It's another integer overflow. If we have 2 large numbers that are near the boundary of how large an integer can actually be, when we add them together, it's going to turn into a very small number. So it takes that, and it takes the added value and compares it to see if there's enough data. And if there's not enough data, then it will jump over, if there's already enough data, it will jump over this allocator. If there's not enough data, then it'll call realloc. And potentially, if you have 2 of those larger integers, it's going to change the memory buffer to something smaller than it needs right here. And if you guys can see the comment, can you see everything well up there? Do you guys see the bling thing? That's the part we like. So this is sort of the last example I have. So with the other ones, I kind of showed you code and showed you the sort of vulnerabilities. With this one, I'm going to show you demos, but not talk much about the code that's actually vulnerable. Who here has heard of Trusteer? Trusteer Rapport? Some of you? A few of you? Okay. So it has proprietary browser lockdown magic. And it takes that proprietary browser lockdown magic, and it can prevent malware from attacking and stealing credentials as it would traditionally do with that magic, whether or not it knows anything about the Trojan variants. So I came up with internet rule number 1. And internet rule number 1 is, if there's 2 programs on a system and both of them don't like each other, whichever one gets there first and has knowledge about disabling the other is going to always win. Which is interesting because inside their white paper, they say that these are sort of the steps they did. And what they did was they infected a system first and then installed their program and then showed that, in fact, the malware wasn't able to take any data off of the system after the program was installed. And when I read white papers like this, I think that's kind of what they mean end users should be doing. Why scan your system first? Just install this product. So I think what happened was some sales guys invented this magic, because if you look inside of the data sheet, they also say that it comes with a rapid update mechanism. And if it doesn't matter whether or not the Trojan is known or unknown, why would you need a rapid update mechanism? So I think the engineers were able to save themselves a bit. And now we'll do some demos if I can get this to work. Here we go. So basically, Trusteer is this thing that runs on your system, and it protects certain websites. Basically, certain websites, when you're visiting them, it puts your machine into this more secure state. And one of the things it doesn't allow is things like screenshots and keylogging. Do you guys see the funny green arrow in the address bar? The funny green arrow shows you that Trusteer is indeed working and definitely protecting you from all of the internet badness. So basically, I wrote this program, super simple, just takes a screenshot, nothing funny about how it does it. So when we take a screenshot normally, this is what comes up, a big black screen. So basically, this is how Trusteer protects you. It sees you're taking a screenshot, and it replaces the normal screenshot data with basically nothing that would be valuable to an attacker. But if we run my program, basically it detects that Trusteer is on the system. Trusteer is completely running right now. You guys saw that black screen. And now, hopefully, if I don't have any more bad luck today, this worked. As you guys can see, Trusteer was completely disabled. In this screenshot, you can see my entire desktop, including the browser. Yeah, basically, anybody who's writing malware would just need to include one function that I have written, and they would be able to completely bypass and disable Trusteer, smash all of their product claims, and turn something that people probably pay a lot of money for into something that's completely worthless. If anything, the interesting part is, not only is it completely worthless at this point, but also if people expect that they can do whatever they want and Trusteer will protect them, and in fact it doesn't, that can actually cause more problems. Excuse me? Can you speak up a bit? Oh no, so the nice thing that they did, because it actually, the functionality that I'm using to turn it off is actually part of the program itself. So the nice thing about that is it needs to be able to do that from Internet Explorer itself. So basically, if you take over Internet Explorer and you're executing in the same process context, you'll be able to completely turn off this software. The other neat thing, who here has developed kernel overflows before? Okay, so they're hard, and I wasn't able to get it to completely work, But do you guys know what a blue screen is? Yeah, we're familiar with that. So here we go. So that actually is also a byproduct of Trusteer. Trusteer installs this kernel driver to encrypt keystrokes into secure processes. And part of the functionality of that kernel driver is it allows you to overwrite heap data, and you can use that to take over a system. It was actually really nice of them, because Internet Explorer went through all the trouble of making sure that there were reduced privileges and everything. And Trusteer came back and gave something that allowed attackers to be able to escalate all the way back up to system privileges. So can we have a round of applause for Trusteer, please? Cool. I'm glad that worked. I was sweating up here. So we have some conclusions with antivirus. Antivirus is still a bit dangerous. The products that implement anti-malware and antivirus still, in fact, have vulnerabilities. One of the reasons that they may still have vulnerabilities is because it's hard to audit. And this isn't necessarily from a technical perspective, but when you're a security researcher and you're auditing things like antivirus and anti-malware, since they're inside the same industry, there's a lot of basically bad blood that might be had, even though what you're doing is helping them to secure their product. Also, one of the conclusions is the value proposition for antivirus needs a bit of a rework. If nobody here believes that it detects malicious programs and that it detects signatures instead, then we need something to be able to actually detect what's malicious or not. Dynamics has an interesting product with their VX class. Has everybody heard of that? Are we waking up a bit? Am I putting people to sleep? So basically, they have an interesting thing that classifies the malware based on the structural properties of the piece of malware. And that might be interesting to implement in an antivirus product. Basically, we need something better than signatures. So I'm going to basically draw all that together, and here are the implications of all of that information. So when security is believed to function as intended, what are people going to do when there's actually an incident? If people believe that there's no possible way that their boot password can be sniffed, if their laptop's lost, they may not be inclined to change passwords or to do any other thing that someone might want to do if they believe that their data was in fact compromised. Also, people who believe they're more secure, such as people who are installing Trusteer, may be more willing to engage in some risky behaviors. They may be willing to go and find a crack or something on the internet and on the same computer, on the same day, access their bank accounts and make trades. So I have somewhat of a crude metaphor. It's kind of like when you have all of these lines of code protecting other pieces of code, it's kind of like using two condoms at once. And basically, when you use two condoms at once, they generate more friction, and that can tend to create rips and basically destroy the entire purpose of a condom. And very similar to that, using more lines of code basically means we're going to expose the same data to attackers in multiple different ways. And that can lead to bad things too. So basically, what are we going to do about all this? Anybody who uses security controls should review them, not just listen to the product literature. Talk to somebody who's knowledgeable about the product from the inside out, possibly, or even contract a third party to look at that piece of software to ensure that you understand what exactly is offered by the product you're using. Another thing is, so a lot of antivirus has the same sort of end-user license agreements that a lot of the other software does. But one of the issues is if security companies resell products, there's a lot of different legal circumstances that could possibly arise for those companies. So because of that, it's a lot harder for someone who's employed by a security company who sells this product from a VAR perspective to actually take a look into these products. So what I recommend is that you only use products that don't create those legal loopholes. You only use products that allow everybody very permissively to audit those pieces of software, because that's how we're going to be able to get better products in the future. Also, when you can, always prefer patching and minimizing the amount of code to increasing the amount of code. Don't try to fix a bandage with a bandage, because you only have 2 bandages then. So another thing to do would be to encourage peers and anybody else in the security industry to dismiss the stigma that's associated with having vulnerabilities in a product. Every product has vulnerabilities. If it's of a sufficiently complex nature, it's going to have bugs inside of it. And having that stigma makes it harder to review products from industry companies and companies in general. By saying, oh, this product is horrible because it has vulnerabilities in it, basically you're giving those companies who produce that software the ability to say, this affects my bottom line, this is going to turn people off from using my product, and in the end it doesn't help anybody. It makes it harder for people to actually look at it in the future. So I recently got into stock trading, and I decided I was going to make some forward-looking statements. So one thing that I think that's going to happen in the future is that more products are going to be introduced with tantalizing claims. Has everybody heard about the stuff with Liget security and all that? Yeah, they're not going to be the first, and there's going to be lots of others who make wild and crazy claims inside the security space. And the idea is, if they're saying something that you don't think can be true or possible, it's probably not true, nor is it possible. And once they make those claims, the claims will be made humble again by people who are able to actually look at that and say, no, this security claim doesn't stand up. So another thing is that more security products are going to have vulnerabilities discovered, patched, disclosed, and exploited. Basically, it's going to happen. Security products are... does anybody here write security products for a living? Okay, we have a few people. So basically, anybody who writes security products knows that there's a lot of lines of code. You have to do crazy things. You have to be able to implement your own parsers. Basically, they're incredibly complex, and because of that, it's guaranteed that there's going to be vulnerabilities in that software that will be discovered. So this is kind of what I'm hoping, and if you can spread the word, I'm thinking it could be one of those things that if you say it enough, it becomes true. I think eventually security companies are going to start offering bug bounties. And what's interesting is, even if it doesn't necessarily motivate researchers, if a company offers a bug bounty, what they're saying is it's completely all right to audit our code. It's completely all right no matter what legal agreements we may have in place, because they're encouraging it through monetary incentives. So I guess that's it. Do we have questions? Anything? Absolutely. So one thing is the security industry itself. Oh, you want me to repeat the question? Okay, so the question was, what's the end game here? Are we going to keep on getting security software where there's vulnerabilities that come out and it's not good enough? And what I think is the security community itself, and this is something that we all tend to forget, is still an infant in the entire field of computer science. And because of that, I think what we're doing is we're learning, and there's going to be people who are making claims that basically, if you look back at the California gold rush, that there's lots of gold in this area of California, even though there's not. And what I think is going to happen after a while is, if auditing these products is encouraged and if people pay attention to these types of things, then what I think will happen is the products will eventually mature to the point where they're generally useful. So the security companies are doing their due diligence. One of the issues is Microsoft has every researcher looking at it. It's very well known that if you find Microsoft vulnerabilities, you'll be invited to their Blackhat party. It's very well known that there will be no legal consequences, and because of that, they have the entire industry, every single company that's looking to make a name for themselves, finding vulnerabilities inside of Microsoft code. The issue is with security products in general, they kind of have a weaker security posture right now, because they don't have all those eyes on their code. They don't have all those people looking into it because of all that stigma I mentioned throughout the presentation. So I don't want to comment on any specific incidents or name any specific vendors, but in general, when you find a vulnerability inside of a security product, they tend to be harder to deal with. They tend to not acknowledge the fact that you did any research, and they tend to take it basically as saying that their product is completely inadequate, and that's not the truth. I mean, I was making jokes up here about how the security things were vulnerable, but it was because you guys were sleeping, so I'm going to blame it all on you. Anybody else? Yeah, Tavis. What's my opinion of what? Oh, so exactly. Whitelisting technologies, I like those. And the reason I like whitelisting technologies is because it follows that principle. Basically what you're saying is you can only execute this small amount of code. You can only execute these small amounts of things that basically it limits your attack surface and makes you more secure by limiting the amount of code that can be run. Yeah, absolutely. Who here wants to implement whitelisting that tries to secure things? How hard is it? Yeah, super hard. I got a few laughs that time. That was the first time all day. So basically, whitelisting is super hard to get right. And because of that, I think those areas are starting to mature more. As one of those things where I said the security industry is starting to mature more, I think whitelisting is something that we'll see in the next 10 years potentially, and we'll be able to do it in a more streamlined fashion. Anybody else? It depends how you define logic vulnerability, right? Because Trusteer was not developed to be able to turn off like that necessarily. So potentially it is a logic vulnerability from the perspective of you're able to execute code without corrupting memory, and it's something that basically can turn off all of the security that's offered by it. So potentially you could look at that as a logic vulnerability. With all of these things, so my job generally isn't to secure things. My job is basically to figure out where the vulnerabilities are in new technologies. But basically, I don't look at them as logic vulnerabilities or heap overflows until I need to classify them. I generally look at them as extended functionality. And by extended functionality, I mean being able to execute code remotely. Anybody else? I think that's it then. Thank you all for coming.